This series is made possible by the generous donation of Stifel Financial and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Where Do We Go From Here? I'm your host, Lou Sitzer. This is Nevada County Television. This is a series of shows that I'm producing with the help of many people here on staff. And I want to also let you know that the shows will be on Cablecast, Comcast Channel 17 on Monday nights, 7 p.m. You can find them as well on YouTube, Where Do We Go From Here, NCTV. And I'll repeat this at the end of the show just to make sure. So this episode, we're looking at the Centennial Dam, and we have with us Nick Wilcox, who is an old friend from many years ago, and also on the NID board, Nevada Irrigation Board. So before we get into the details of the dam, I just want to reflect back 40 years ago when Nick and I took a group of teenagers, hiked down to the bottom of Grand Canyon and backpacked for a period of 2 weeks. While, and I'm saying if we could deal with teenagers backpacking for 2 weeks, we can deal with a dam.
Well, we did this for 2 weeks, and the total cost per student at the end of the day was $40 for the 2 weeks.
Well, those times have changed some, although I would be a real advocate for backpacking and Grand Canyon if you can do it. It was 40 years ago when we were younger considerably. And now here we are again talking about water issues and community issues that are really of great import. This is an issue that we're dealing with in the state of California because of anticipated water shortages. We've had droughts. We have climate change, which adds a whole notion of unpredictability. And so the dam is one option that the NID is seriously considering, a very expensive one, but that's only part of the story. So Nick, if you would just give us a brief intro to your background with water, and then how long you've been on the board and where you stand in terms of the dam.
Okay. Well, my background in water, I've been dabbling in water for a number of years. I worked for a local engineering firm, Cranmer Engineering. I was the lab director of the water and wastewater analysis lab. Did that for 13 or 14 years, left and went back to graduate school. As a graduate student, I took a job with the State Water Resources Control Board in Sacramento. And I initially worked as an environmental scientist doing CEQA, or environmental analysis of water right applications throughout the state. I was quickly grabbed by the Bay Delta program. The Bay Delta is a statewide water issue in California, and I became director of the Bay Delta program. I participated in 90 days of hearing to implement water quality standards for the state of California in the Bay Delta. We were sued, of course, by many parties, including the environmental document, which I was a co-author of. We successfully defended that through the California Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And the decision that we issued on the Bay Delta is the law of the day.
Mm-hmm. And then at some point you moved over to the NID board. You retired?
Well, I retired from the state in 2003 or thereabouts. And I did run for the NID board in 2004, and I was defeated by an incumbent. I was challenging a 4-term incumbent, and I lost by 36 votes out of 9,000 cast, which is actually not nearly close enough to challenge the vote. And then I ran for the board again in 2008 when it was an open seat. It was a five-way race. I was elected with 55% of the total vote in a five-way race. And I'm currently in my third term on the NID board.
And how long has the NID board been pursuing the idea of the dam?
90 years.
Yeah, since about the 20s.
Yeah. The idea for this was first broached in 1921. And NID purchased the bulk of the property in the Centennial Dam site around 1925. And so we were by far the majority landowner in that, and we own the dam site. And this puts the district in an interesting position because there's probably no other districts in the state of California that own the last best natural dam site in the state. But we do, and the reason we do is that there was a lot of foresight.
Right, and I would. So, what were the circumstances back in the 20s for a dam? I guess maybe the nation has been on a dam building binge, but I think that's been slowed down considerably recently. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
No, you're right on that. There was a period of time in the 40s, 50s, and 60s when the federal government particularly was going damn crazy.
Right. It was infrastructure. It was post-depression.
It was post-depression. Some of the early ones, like Hoover Dam was built in the late 20s and 30s. That was kind of a make-work project because of the Depression.
Tennessee Valley Authority.
Tennessee Valley Authority was a huge project. In California, Shasta Dam was built in the 1940s, primarily, and a lot of the projects up in the Columbia Basin were built then. And then it was to produce cheap electricity to run aluminum smelters so we could win World War II.
Well, and
so those projects won World War II.
Right, and we've since moved on. We're not at that crisis in terms of production any longer, but we're in a different kind of crisis, which you referred to in your article for the Union on the need to address climate change. And I think that was one of the reasons that you were pursuing the idea of the dam personally.
Well, we were in a dam building phase in the 50s and 60s, partly because that was the thing to do, and there were sites available. Many of the ideal and natural dam sites in California have been constructed. And so as a way of dealing with future water supply issues, overall, dam building is not the answer because most of those sites are built. The only area in the state where those sites haven't been built are in the kind of the North Coast area and the Trinity and Eel River basins. But the geologic conditions do not allow safe construction of major dams there. And so those rivers have all been declared wild and scenic. Those projects have all failed, and they will never be built, partly because it's wild and scenic, and also partly because the geology does not allow safe construction of dams. And as one of the criteria for a dam, it must be safe. It's not acceptable to build a dam and then have it fail and wipe out millions of people.
Yeah, right. We're sort of getting a taste of what that could be.
Well, we have had that kind of dam failure in the past, and so NID has to be very careful that whatever facilities we build are deemed safe.
Which brings to mind a question I want to address at some point, and that is, there was Auburn Dam was proposed and did not succeed, and I was wondering.
I am familiar with it.
Okay, well, maybe you could talk about why that didn't happen.
I think for a variety of reasons. The thing that held it up at the time was the fact that they built it on top of an earthquake fault. They had to go back and redesign the dam and make it from a dam that would have potentially been impacted by an earthquake there to a dam that was essentially a gravity dam. There are different types of dams. One type of dam is to just make a huge pile of concrete and just stick it in a river channel. Right. And it holds back the water by the sheer mass of the structure. And so that's what they had to go to with Auburn Dam. By the time they got to that point, the federal law had changed to the point where the people who were taking water from the dam actually had to pay the cost of the water. And once people who were beneficiaries of the water had to actually pay for the cost of the water became so expensive that there weren't customers anymore.
Right.
and so Auburn Dam languished for many years, and there were actual permits issued by the State Water Resources Control Board for Auburn Dam. And one of the actions that I was involved in at the State Water Board was to basically blow the whistle on the Bureau of Reclamation for not building the dam, and they had let their permits lapse, and so that they had to renew their permits. They had written an environmental document in the early days for the Auburn Dam on the back of a napkin, and environmental conditions had changed, and so as a water board member, we wrote a letter to Reclamation saying, oh, by the way, your environmental documentation is stale. It's no longer valid. You need to engage in the environmental process all over again. And faced with that, they canceled their project. So the Auburn Dam is dead.
Okay, so that's not coming back.
Well, that's not to say it's not coming back, but it's going to be difficult.
Okay. And in the meantime, you did write this piece for the union, really advocating the need for greater water storage in view of climate change.
Okay, well, let me just trace the basic argument there. The climate is changing. We pretty much have to stipulate to that. I don't think there's much disagreement about that. Proponents and opponents of a Centennial Dam pretty much agree on that. So if climate is changing, it's basically warming. It means there's less snowpack. As a district, we, like many others in the Sierra, rely on natural storage on the ground from snowpack in the winter. So if there's less snowpack, then that has a direct impact on the amount of water that you have available for customers. So the way we operate our system now is to rely on that spring snowmelt to supply our farmers with irrigation water as late into the summer as we can before we start releasing water from storage to meet direct needs.
It's not just farmers, though. You're looking at a lot of residents who also rely.
Well, we have 25,000 residential customers, it's true, but in terms of how our water is delivered, 90% of our deliveries go to agriculture, about 10% go to urban uses. Consequently, conservation measures of urban water really have no impact on the water scene because it's a small percentage of our water, and of course urban water is all released in stream as wastewater, where we redivert it and we deliver it to farmers. So there's actually no upside to urban conservation for NID.
Wow, that's amazing, because we talk about conservation. So in terms of water savings, it would be mostly whether farmers can conserve.
That's the only conservation that is meaningful. And of course agriculture relies on irrigation. We live in a Mediterranean climate. We get all our water in the winter and all our uses in the summer, which is when the growing season is. And so in this area, we basically survive by transporting water in time from the time of surplus to a time of need. And then it's a question of what do you do in multiple year drought scenarios, and do you have enough water to tide you over multiple drought years. And if you look simply at storage, the answer to that is no, we don't.
So you're looking at storage really to maintain the status quo or to anticipate future usage?
Well, we're just trying to claw back the status quo. Losing snowpack storage is a reduction in the district's ability to meet current demand. This is not really about future development. There is some development that takes place, but generally the urbanization, which is what people point to, is rather small in our district. So the two problems in terms of demand on our system are climate change, and the other is an interesting demand that we have to deal with in the future, and that is future environmental demand. So we have recently gone through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission relicensing process on our.
That's known as FERC.
We've gone through. We have a new FERC license. We negotiated with environmental interests on new in-stream flows for our FERC license, and they have not gone into effect. But once those new flows go into effect, we have an additional 15 to 40,000 acre-foot demand on our system, which fundamentally requires us to build a new reservoir to meet environmental commitments.
So when you say environmental flows, could you be more specific? What does that mean to the public?
It means that in the new FERC license, we're required to meet certain minimum in-stream flows at various points throughout the system. Is
that for fish and habitat?
It's for habitat mainly and fish. And in order to meet minimum in-stream flows, you have to have water in storage somewhere to meet those flows. So the water doesn't come, it can't be created by magic. It has to be somewhere, and it has to be there in sufficient quantities to meet your legal requirements.
So and when does this relicensing need to be completed?
I should live so long.
It's that long?
We started the process in about 2008. We're mostly through the process. We are currently operating on a series of what are called annual licenses, and we're going after a 30 to 50-year license. Because FERC is notoriously slow and so on. But once our long-term FERC license is issued, then we have to meet this new flow regime. And we agreed to that.
Yeah. So, for someone like myself who I've been paying attention to this issue, I've been going to NID meetings, and it hasn't come up until you mentioned it just now. And
there's multiple elephants in the room that you were unaware of.
That's true, and I'm thinking this casts a whole nother light on, quote, the need of a dam, because we're looking at storage capacity.
Well, if you don't have storage capacity and you have higher requirements in the system, then you can meet those requirements in other ways. Such as cutting off classes of customers. And reducing demands. There are many ways of doing this, and in the end, I think in the final analysis, there's no one alternative that gets us where we need to go. I think we need additional storage, we need to conserve, we need to encase ditches and reduce leakage. We probably need to raise some of the existing dams, Dredging is a source, although dredging is not the source that people make it out to be, because in terms of doing our water modeling, we have all the reservoirs in the models at full capacity. So the amount of water that's available to us is actually less than what the models say. And dredging is very expensive, and dredging has other issues associated with it, because our watershed is heavily contaminated with mercury, and that gets into the reservoirs, and you start dredging and stirring it up, and all the fish start dying, things like that.
Right. Yeah, everything has consequences.
It's all tied together. Didn't Thoreau say that at one point?
Right, and that's what we're learning.
You pick up a stone, and you've actually picked up the whole universe.
Well, that's what we're doing here. You know, we're turning the soil.
Bless you, Lou.
Well, there's so many facets to this, and as we talked about a little prior to the show, the need to educate ourselves. And I won't just say the public, because it's an education that requires listening to all perspectives. And something that has been levied at NID is the lack of transparency, the lack of bringing information to the public in a way that can be a discussion rather than a decision. So I'm wondering how you would comment on that.
I agree with you. I will concede that NID has gotten the cart before the horse a little bit in this process. To those of us who are immersed in these issues, the solutions seem fairly plain. But we need to bring the public along, because in the end, NID should be able to supply the community with whatever water future it wants. And if that means there's no dam in the future, you have to live with the consequences of that decision. And
less farming.
Less farming. Okay, so for example, 90% of our water goes to agriculture. So how can you meet the supply and demand crunch? You could shed areas of demand. You could get rid of certain classes of customers. And
my little farm would go, but that's okay. I've accepted that.
Perhaps. But what people don't realize is that there is a pecking order that's established in law on how you cut off customers.
Right.
So this is actual California water code.
Water rights.
Well, it has nothing to do with water rights per se. NID owns the water rights, and so NID can serve water to its place of use pursuant to its water rights to the extent that it has water.
Okay.
Water rights don't guarantee water. Water rights are like a hunting license. It gives you the right to hunt for water, but it does not guarantee that you get water.
Okay.
Just like a hunting license doesn't guarantee that you'll come home with a deer.
Right.
So a fair question would be, what is the pecking order that's established in law? The most junior water users are out-of-district raw and treated water customers because they're not in the district. We have a legal obligation to serve the customers in our district.
Right.
Good to know. The second level of cutoff would be non-agricultural raw water users, so golf courses and lakes. Lake Wildwood is in my division. I have 3,000 voters.
Many of whom are golfers.
Many of whom are golfers or lake lovers.
Yeah.
And so their golf course is gone and their lake is gone. So I have constituents who probably don't really like that scenario. Okay, then you get into the agricultural pecking order, and there is a legal pecking order there. Annual crops go first, perennial crops go second, livestock goes third, and then the most senior users of water, the last to be cut, are the urban users of water, or the so-called treated water customers. And we have 25,000 of them.
I'm one.
Well, you're both.
I am both.
So you're a low priority and a higher priority. And that's
great to know.
It's a very difficult, complex problem.
It is, and it's important for people to understand that there is a pecking order and that there are consequences to water shortages, and that in California, we're very vulnerable, not just our area. We've been referred to as water wealthy in this region, but lots of Californians are going to be in worse shape.
And a lot of it relates back to the Sierra snowpack. The Sierra snowpack is the water source for the entire state.
Right.
To the extent that it provides water for, let's say, the State Water Project, which delivers water to 2/3 of the people in the state of California, and either completely or partially. And the State Water Project in recent years has had to cut back its deliveries to its customers. So in wet years, they're lucky to get 10% deliveries. So they're already having to face this. Let me just focus on this year.
Okay.
This year is an interesting year. Last year was probably the wettest year on record, or maybe the second wettest year on record. It had a good snowpack. We came out of last year with brimming reservoirs.
Right.
And this year, the precipitation is about 90% of average. So this is a little bit of a below average year.
Mm-hmm.
The snowpack is, I do know what.
We know what it is right now, but it's getting warmer quickly.
It's, the April 1st snow survey, which is our benchmark survey, will probably come in somewhere between 25 and 50% of average.
Mm-hmm.
So this year, because we had a dry February, we were on the verge of declaring drought conditions in February, and we got bailed out in March. We had another miracle March. In terms of water planning, it's very unwise to count on a miracle March every year.
Right.
And that's kind of where we are. So we were on the cusp of having to declare cutbacks, even though the fact that our reservoirs are about 140% of average.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, just anticipating what your water usage will be and how much storage you're going to be able to replenish.
There was no snowpack.
Right.
And so therefore, full reservoirs, our reservoirs are not big enough to get us through even a normal year. And if we were in a scenario of multiple critically dry years in a row, that happened in 77 and 76, 2 critically dry years in a row. We have to plan for 3 critically dry years in a row. This could happen. It hasn't happened in the past, but there is a chance that it could happen. It's about a 1 in 400 chance, but that's you have to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the question is, how will our system perform with its current structure in a multiple critically dry year scenario without new storage? And the answer is that we would have to cut off all agricultural water.
Mm-hmm.
We would probably have to institute 90% conservation
for residents.
for residential users.
Right.
So it's a very dire picture.
Right.
And that's kind of the worst case scenario. And so where it'll end up is somewhere in the middle.
We know that there's uncertainty. That's a given.
There is uncertainty, but there is less uncertainty about the warming trend.
Right.
So there's not much uncertainty that snowpack is declining.
Right.
What there is uncertainty about is whether the future will be wetter, drier, or about the same.
Mm-hmm.
And all we can do is go on the best modeling that we have available to us. And basically the best modeling available to us says that the future will be about the same in terms of total precipitation, but it will come as rain, and it will run off quicker.
Right.
And if the future is wetter, we still have a problem because we don't have enough storage.
Yeah.
So that water just runs off. If the future is drier, then I don't know what we do.
Well, addressing the title of the program, Where Do We Go From Here? And listening and watching the previous episodes dealing with Centennial Dam, it's been clear to me that we need a full-blown way in which to have a discussion with the community. And I think that NID is approaching this understanding as well.
Yeah, I think where we're going with that, Lou, is that we're going to establish an advisory committee that will be made up of stakeholders from all elements of the community. This committee needs to include business interests, it needs to include governmental interests, special districts, environmental interests, farmers, absolutely farmers, and farmers can be broken down into various classes.
Yeah.
And you have different kinds of farmers. You have marijuana farmers.
Phew,
You
right.
have
We haven't even talked about that.
which
Right.
is another demand on the system that we haven't really taken into account.
Right. And that's going to be throughout the state as well. It isn't just here.
And so all of the facts need to be presented to this advisory committee,
Right.
and the community needs to tell us what water future they want.
Right. So I think that what I'm hearing is that NID is open to a discussion, is open to considering the alternatives, and wants to share in the process, because that's sort of what, in order to sort of overcome, and I'm being positive about this, overcome a resistance, there needs to be inclusion. There needs to be,
Right. There will be a process. I think we have come to realize that we're somewhat remiss in skipping over that. So we're gonna pull back, and we're going to engage in a process.
Great.
Well, as directors, my job is to give the community what they want.
Right.
And if what they want is extreme conservation and water shortages, then tell us.
Okay.
We can do that. That's easy.
Right.
That's easy. It's not easy to do it. It's not fun when you're doing it, but we can do that.
Yeah. Right. Well, one of the things that's clear to me, and I've really struggled with this over the last few weeks, is how complicated the issue is. It's not a simple issue. It has a lot of stakeholders, has a lot of consequences, and it is approaching, in my mind, a crisis, not so much of disagreement as it is in weather and what we are being confronted with over time with climate. So that's going to produce movement.
Okay, it's complicated, and I've worked in the statewide water wars, but we had two sayings that we marched by every day. Was that Mark Twain was correct, that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over, and that in California, at least, water flows uphill towards money.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the. Once you get those two concepts down, then it becomes less complicated.
Okay. Well, on those words of wisdom from Mark Twain and Nick Wilcox, we'll draw a close to this program, but in fact, this series will continue on Centennial Dam. It will be posted on YouTube. Where Do We Go From Here? NCTV. They'll also be aired on Comcast Channel 17, Monday nights at 7 p.m. This is a program series that would like your support in viewing, and if you are willing and like the idea of hearing these kinds of discussions, please donate NevadaCountyTelevision.org. Thanks a lot for watching.